A lot of people were unhappy with how much retirement love the UFC and the broadcasters gave Anthony Smith, which is weird. You almost never see the announcement of a celebrity or politician or someone who passes away. You almost never see anything negative. Even if it's even politicians, right? Like, let's say you're a Democrat and a Republican dies. It's always okay when they passed away. Let's say something nice. Eulogies are rarely written with anger, especially with fighters retiring. Fighters retire, it's, oh, happy trails. Thanks for the great memories. I'll never forget when whatever. I'll never forget fight A. I'll never forget when you said B. All that knockout you had in 2017. I was in the building when you had that great win. That's always 99% of the eulogy of fans remembering a fighter who walks away, has their final fight, and retires. But for some reason, the love Anthony Smith got on Saturday and over the weekend and into this week came with a lot of anger, came with a lot of confusion. It came with a lot of, man, I can't believe they did so much for Anthony, and all Stipe got was a tweet. Anthony Smith's legacy, Anthony Smith and what he's known for and what he brought to MMA, is not something you see on a Fight Finder. You ask yourself, why was George St. Pierre so good? Just go to his wins and losses. He beat every man he ever faced. He didn't lose a round for half a decade. As champion, against the best fighters in the second best weight class at the time, 170 pounds. It doesn't, you could just look at a screenshot of his record and you're like, okay, that's why George St. Pierre is one of the greatest fighters of all time. John Jones, you look at who he beat and how, and you're just like, yep, that's one of the best fighters of all time. You know why they're special, because it's easy. New fans to the sport quickly understand why George St. Pierre was so good. New fans to the sport quickly understand why Demetrius Johnson was so good. But just wins and losses don't define every legacy. There's only a handful of fighters where you can just look at their record and be like, yeah, I know why people love that guy. Anthony Smith isn't one of them. He's got plenty of losses, 38-22. 60 fights, 38-22. And a lot of those losses came on the regional scene too. This is a guy that was fighting in Nebraska barnyards in front of Kansas City Mafia for betting. Like, he didn't get his name Lionheart because he took John Jones's best shot as that illegal knee to the face in their title fight and said, I'm still good, I can go. He didn't get his name because of that. He got his nickname because of the Jean-Claude Van Damme movie Lionheart. Because there were gamblers, there was mafia at his barnyard fights betting on which round he would win. And he said, okay, you want a second round knockout? That's what I'll give you. That's why he got the name Lionheart. Because he comes from that generation. Because that's his background. That's why he's Lionheart. You won't find a realer motherfucker than Anthony Smith. People that come from where he comes from, they don't have millions of dollars in the bank. They're not sports celebrities. They're in jail or dead. The guys he grew up with are addicted to meth. Anthony Smith is wearing Versace suits and talking on ESPN. That's Anthony Smith's legacy, where he came from. And he's from an age that you don't really see anymore. You don't really see guys come from that scene, that rough and tumble Midwest fighting in a barn scene. Guys in the UFC now, they're there because they were all-American wrestlers and they went 7-0 on the regional scene, fought a contender series, and now they're in. Guys in the UFC, like, yeah, you're 12-0 and from Dagestan, and now you're in the UFC. You're from one of the big gyms in Brazil, and you won a regional title down there, and now you're in the UFC. you're in the UFC because you're from China and you've been at the Performance Institute for 4 years and you've been manicured and brought to the UFC. That's who goes to the UFC, not the Anthony Smiths. That era is over. These Midwest dudes that made their money fighting in front of KC Mafia guys, saving their knockout for round 2 so Vinny can cash his check. That doesn't happen anymore. That's where he came from. And he didn't change when he came to the UFC. When Anthony Smith was cut the first time, he fought one time in the UFC, lost, and they cut him right away. Right? Fought in Strikeforce, fought one time and got cut. After that, Anthony Smith said, give me the toughest guys on the regional scene. I'm going to beat them to get back to the UFC. And he did. He won 7 fights in a row after getting cut from the UFC and made it back. And then when he got there, he started knocking fools out. From 2016 to 2018, he was 6-1, won 6 of 7, all finishes. Knocked out Hector Lombard when Hector Lombard was still a big deal. You remember that fight? Hey, you know my name now? You know my name now? Won 3 in a row against Rashad Evans, Shogun, and Volkan Oezdemir. And then earned him a title fight against John Jones. Nothing will personify the career and legacy of Anthony Smith like that night on March 2nd, 2019. UFC 235. I'll never forget that night for many reasons. That's the last time I bought a ticket to go to a UFC. I was working at the UFC at the time, but I was like, I had a buddy in town. I was like, I had that night off. I was like, okay, that was the last time I purchased a ticket to the UFC, and that was to see Anthony Smith fight John Jones. And we all remember that night. John Jones is clearly up on every scorecard. Anthony Smith is beaten up, outclassed, out-physicaled, out-game planned. John Jones is the best that ever was, and he showed why that night against Anthony Smith. And then in round 5, John Jones throws one of the most flagrant and blatantly illegal knees to a grounded opponent that you will ever see in the UFC. Herb Dean stops, takes 2 points. Have you ever seen Herb Dean take 2 points? I could pull out a gun in the UFC and shoot my opponent, and Herb Dean wouldn't take away 2 points. He'd wave his finger at me and say, all right, this is your last warning. Put the Glock down. It's like, all right, give me the Glock. And he'd click it, make sure the shell's out, hand me the gun back and say, don't do it again. That's what Herb Dean would do. But
show me that gun again, I'm going to give you 2 more warnings.
And I'll tell you what, and that second warning, it's going to be really stern. Like, I'm going to speak with my chest. And Herb Dean took 2 points away. I don't think I've ever seen Herb Dean take 2 points away. That's how flagrantly illegal that knee was by John Jones. Anthony Smith is sitting with his back up against the cage, bleeding profusely from the face. The doctor says, can you continue? He says, yep, I'm good. At that moment, Anthony Smith could have, rightfully so, said, it is not fair for this fight to continue. I am a compromised combat sport athlete after taking that knee. And he was. And he wouldn't be lying. And Anthony Smith would have rightfully and correctly been light heavyweight champion that night because that move was so flagrant and so illegal from John Jones. But he didn't. Anthony Smith has said multiple times, he's talked about that moment more time. I've heard him talk about that moment more times than I can remember. He said, I sleep good at night, knowing that I answered that question correctly. I can continue, and I will. I've been cage side for more high-level, mid-level, amateur level, professional level, championship level fights than I can remember. That is still the ballsiest thing I have ever seen in a mixed martial arts cage. So, yeah, is Anthony Smith on a losing streak? Yeah, did the last few years when the wear and tear of that long career and on his body wear him down and not give great performances? Sure, yeah, his record speaks for itself since he beat Ryan Spann in 2021. He's lost 6 of his last 8 fights, and they've been pretty bad losses. But I will tell you, his legacy is not what you see in a Fight Finder. His legacy will not be read on Wikipedia. His legacy is Lionheart fighting through the barns of Nebraska to the highest level of the sport, always being real, always being honest, an incredibly insightful guy, a guy that came from absolutely nothing. A place like the guys he grew up with, you don't know who they are. They're in cell block A. Or they're in cemeteries. And Anthony Smith is now a husband, a father of 4 beautiful daughters. He got to fight the greatest fighter of all time. He got to be in the biggest stage the sport has. He now wears fancy suits and speaks at ESPN on a desk. He's on Sirius XM every single week or more. And he displayed one of the most ballsy things I've ever seen in a mixed martial arts cage. So to everyone who's pissed that the people who know Anthony Smith and work with Anthony Smith wanted to remember him correctly, do me a favor. Take your lower lip, wrap it over your head, and swallow. Because fuck you. Anthony Smith's legacy is what I just told you, and not something that requires a URL. Russo, you know Anthony well. Am I over-exaggerating this guy?
No, and the way you say it, like the reason why Anthony deserved all this retirement stuff, you had said it's not on the Fight Finder. You're right. And I remember the moment I became an over-the-top Anthony Smith fan, because I had always liked Anthony. And as a producer, well before he was a host on the show, he was one of the few fighters that truly understood the importance of doing media. And maybe it was because he got cut and he realized, okay, if people want to talk to you, that's a good thing. Take those opportunities, get your name out there, do as many as you can. I had always liked dealing with Anthony, but there was a moment where I truly went over the top and I'm like, I'm ride or die now. I'm a fan of this dude. And it was right after the Jones loss. Because if you remember, he actually came on the show back when it was MMA Tonight, and I believe it was you and Dan Hardy hosting. And most fighters, especially losing a title fight, they don't feel like doing media after that. Anthony did. And there was a moment in there where I remember him stopping and being like, well, you guys saw the fight. Like, what do you think I could have done better? And it wasn't a sarcastic ask. He wasn't like, oh, what do you think I could have done? He was earnestly and sincerely asking, you and another guy who ran up against an all-time great in Dan Hardy, like, what do you guys, like, do you guys think I could have fought differently? And when I heard it, I almost couldn't believe he asked that question. I haven't seen a fighter do that with anyone before or after Anthony did that. And that was the moment I'm like, this is a guy with zero ego to ask that to 2 hosts who are interviewing him. What do you think I could have done better? Did you see anything in there? That moment is why Anthony was one of the realest dudes, because who else would ask a question like that in an interview after they just had a heartbreaking loss for the title, where they could have ran away with it if they felt like it, but played it out because they knew in their heart they could fight on. Those are the little things of why I've always said Anthony's one of the realest dudes. That's why I was happy we got him as a host here on the channel, because he's going to give you his thoughts. And sometimes I think that rubs fans the wrong way, that he's not going to give you the political answer. He's going to say what's on his mind. He's going to tell it the way he knows it. He's going to talk about the fight game the way he's lived it. And sometimes that pisses people off. But Anthony's a real dude in the sport, and it's a rare thing.